Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. Patch 9.1.5 came to PTR only recently, but it did start off with a lot of anticipation. A lot of changes are yet to come, and in future builds, patch 9.1.5 is going to evolve. And what a lot of people want to see out of this patch is class changes, tunings, making certain specs and covenants and playstyles and legendaries a little bit better, a little bit more favored. And while not a popular decision, some players do want to see some nerfs, like potentially Windwalker monks in arenas. In today's video, I want to take a look at all the different updates, and primarily most of these class updates have been just raw buffs, but majority of these updates that are buffs have been through conduits, where conduits are a borrowed power system that isn't buffing inherent aspects of certain specs, but rather conduits that empower other playstyles. Either way, I'm going to take a look at all these buffs, everything that's looking stronger and better so far in this first look of updates going into patch 9.1.5. The first buff we'll talk about is from the Blood Death Knight. The conduit Debilitating Malady has been beefed up significantly. When you use Blood Boil, it puts a debuff on the enemy where your main disease that does damage to the enemy but also heals you actually ramps up in damage, and every single one of those Blood Boil stacks now is going to be more impactful. It's worth mentioning that currently this is the worst conduit for Blood Death Knights for damage or survivability. Also, the amount of haste I had was not enough to maintain Blood Boil, since it is reduced in cooldown with more haste, and you will need high haste in order to be able to juggle this debuff constantly on the enemy comfortably. We'll see if they end up tuning this one a little bit better in the future. The second conduit is actually going to be Death's Due buff for the Night Fae with Withering Ground, where Death's Due is going to do significantly more damage. Death's Due is kind of like a modified Death and Decay. Death and Decay is an ability that's part of the rotation for Blood Death Knights as well as Unholy, with some benefits for Frost. From my testing for Blood Death Knights, with the constant resets of Death and Decay, this ability actually gets quite a bit of value. It doesn't do big damage in the opener, but in a Mythic Plus scenario, this could be good AoE consistent damage over time. Combined with a talent that adds a 90% diminution over time, slow to Death and Decay, Death's Due could actually be used for Blood Death Knights to kite while also maintain some semblance of damage. This could potentially be a very powerful AoE tool for Blood Death Knights going forward just on the damage alone, as this conduit has been significantly buffed. Maybe too early to say if Fae is going to be the go-to covenant for Blood Death Knights in 9.1.5. For the spec of Unholy Death Knight, you can actually combo this together with Death's Due Withering Ground conduit that's got buffed, together with the talent of Defile to have your Death's Due grow in size as well as in value as well as in strength. I wanted to test what kind of damage could you get if you were to put all your talents in one basket, solely working to buff the damage of your Death and Decay or Death's Due as much as possible. Normally, Death and Decay for Unholy Death Knight does do a bit of damage, but it's mostly there in order to give a bit of credence to cleave from your Scourge Strike so you can hit multiple enemies. And the damage that this applies was actually kind of okay, together combined with the strength buff whenever enemies are attacked from certain abilities while inside of your Death's Due. It also transfers some of that power from them onto you, which creates an interesting AoE focus and potentially could allow certain talents with this conduit buff, which is a significant buff, to maybe be some sort of an AoE alternative. I also tried to test it with Frost, as I currently play my Frost Death Knight as a Night Fae, mostly because I like the two-hand playstyle, and big obliterates cleaving on a secondary target, which is part of the big draw of Death's Due, is something I actually quite enjoy. The damage for the conduit for Frost Death Knight is not worth it though. It technically can be okay damage if you're looking for something that's uncapped, but with the way that Frost is and with some uncapping going on forward with some of the other abilities, I don't think it's worth investing the conduit for Frost in particular. Moving on to Demon Hunters, Sinful Brand the Venthyr ability will have its cooldown reduced to 45 seconds instead of a minute, which means more uses in single target scenarios, which could have potential to bring Venthyr to the forefront for Demon Hunters, at least in single target. Besides that, Dancing with Fate conduit has been increased significantly, which could make your Blade Dance a bit more of a used ability in the rotation. It's a very cool flash ability that I actually saw it getting used a lot less at the beginning of Shadowlands with the Cycle of Hatred build, where you basically didn't press Blade Dance unless you were at the target cap in terms of AoE damage. And since then, the damage of this ability has been brought back a little. With this conduit being added, it might provide quite a significant amount of AoE damage to include and potentially make it a more pressed ability going forward. Depends how strong they keep this conduit and how strong they make the Blade Dance ability. It would be fun to see it being more often used in single target scenarios without having to go for a specifically Blade Dance talent build. For hunters, the Necrolord Covenant isn't the most popular, so Blizzard actually added a debuff mechanic to it. The debuff and the actual tooltip of the ability are a little different. The current debuff on PTR makes your primary target take 10% more damage from your and your pet's abilities, whereas the tooltip reads 3% more damage for every enemy that got hit by Death Chakram. So the tooltip suggests some AoE capability, while the actual in-game version does suggest more single target output. Either way, the Necrolord Covenant isn't often played for Hunter, and potentially we could be seeing more Necrolord Hunters outside of just PvP. For amongst the conduit for the Night Fae, Way of the Fae has gotten increased by 100%. The conduit buffs the damage of the Night Fae Stump Phalanx ability. With more targets getting hit by the Phalanx Stump, the more damage the ability will do. So it has some single target, but primarily an AoE component to it. With the fact that the Night Fae ability can reset when you use chi spending abilities while standing in the Phalanx, it could potentially mean more significant AoE damage, not like monks really needed more of that, with Bone Dust Brew and the Kyrian allowing them plenty of spinning crane kicks and massive DPS. It's still worth mentioning that the Fae ability still does stay on the ground, and bosses and ads can be moved out of it for mobility purposes. So it's really a question of, is this tuning going to be enough to be on par or as strong as some of the other Covenant abilities? But at least they're trying to bridge that gap of AoE damage even a little bit with the Conduit buff. For Paladins, we have a Necrolord Conduit buff, Necrolord being a very uncommon Covenant, but Righteous Might Necrolord Conduit damage has been increased by a whopping 400%, which hopefully will make this ability hit a little bit harder. And from the early testing, big thanks to Athaman, a regular Paladin in the 5511 duos, he figured out a way to make this ability hit even harder. The Necrolord ability is called Vanquish's Hammer, and with this Conduit buff for Retribution Paladins, it doesn't do that bad of damage. But still, the damage is kind of tame. For protection, however, with the different mastery and versatility, together with a couple other buffs, the damage is significantly higher. You can also run a legendary from the Necrolords that gives you 2 charges of the Vanquisher's Hammer, the Necrolord ability. And potentially as a protection paladin, I was able to hit for 20k crits, but I've seen damage way higher than that from a geared paladin. If the tuning stays, I wonder if this could be the next staple of Prot Paladin PvP, or potentially a bursty alternative to the Venthyr for pure single target bursty damage output. The next bit of tuning came to the other second least favorite Covenant of the Paladin, which is the Night Fae, where you apply blessings on different allies, enhancing their abilities, giving them cooldown reduction, maybe doing more frost damage with some slows, or even more healing. And they changed up a couple of those blessings. Blessing of Spring, which is the Healy blessing. The target will do more healing and take more healing with this change in 9.1.5. While Blessing of Winter, which is one of the weaker damaging buffs, has been buffed ever so slightly, and its slow effect should be a little bit more significant, which could give Paladins another way of slowing down, where Paladins are generally not the most mobile class, but another kind of slow potentially could have some utility usage. The damage was a little bit meh on 9.1.5. And finally, another big buff was with the Warrior's Merciless Bone Grinder for Arms Warrior Conduit. This conduit has been buffed by 100%, and it's one of the weaker conduits for Arms Warriors, not often ran. And the damage that it does now on PTR, at least, with all the buffs like Avatar and the Necrolord banner, the damage is actually quite spiky, where your damage keeps building as soon as you're able to get those whirlwinds over and over and over. Together with the Whirlwind Legendary, this is actually quite a lot of AoE burst damage. And it makes me think that potentially we could be seeing Arms Warriors literally running this for AoE purposes in the future. This should be some of the biggest gains to take a look at going forward, as the patch is still evolving. There's still a lot of changes that are yet to come. It's nowhere near final, but in the first look, these are the biggest upgrades. It looks like Blizzard is looking at conduits in terms of trying to buff certain covenants that are not quite popular with certain playstyles. Necrolord Paladin, Night Fae Death Knight to some extent, the Warrior Conduit that no one really runs in AoE. A lot of these conduits could have some gameplay alternatives and make certain legendaries stronger. Small changes can make ripple effects, so I wonder if that's exactly what Blizzard is going for in patch 9.1.5. The early look is pretty cool and exciting, but I wonder what future holds. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think about these updates and upgrades? And also join the Discord link down below. Hit subscribe if you want to see more regular 9.1.5 updates. And I'll see all of you guys in another one.